You are now listening to the Soul and Wonder Podcast, episode 24, The World Peace Diet with Dr. Will Tuttle.
Welcome to the Soul and Wonder Podcast, where the conduits of the body, depths of the mind, and atlas of the soul are explored with devotion. Through cultural exchange, Christopher and Sara and their guests will deliver sacred wisdom from around the globe, uncovering the hidden gems of conscious living and holistic healing, all to empower you on your journey of self-discovery. And now, here are your hosts, Christopher and Sara.
Welcome to the Soul and Wonder Podcast. We are your hosts, Christopher and
Sara. So happy to have you here. As always, this one, we're going to keep our intro and health tip a little bit short because we've got a lengthier interview than we usually do. But we've got a visionary educator, Dr. Will Tuttle, to join us on our show today. He's presented widely throughout North America as well as worldwide. He's a 35-year vegan, and he's the author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The World Peace Diet, and is a recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award and the Empty Cages Prize. And he's also editor of the recent book, Circles of Compassion, Connecting Issues of Justice. Now, we've read The World Peace Diet. We've seen him in lecture. This man is brilliant. He expresses his points so eloquently, you won't be able to stop listening to him. He is devoted to cultural healing and awakening. He's even a Dharma master in the Zen tradition and has a doctorate degree from the University of California, Berkeley, focused on educating intuition and altruism in adults. He's taught college courses in creativity, humanities, mythology, religion, and philosophy, and he's also a composer and concert pianist with 8 CD albums of original piano music. If that doesn't make you feel guilty for sitting at home watching Netflix, I don't know what will. But Dr. Will Tuttle is noted for his clear and inspiring presentations, and he's even been featured in the hit film documentary Cowspiracy, among others. Super awesome guy. And in this specific episode, we're going to dive into his personal story as well as the main topics of his best-selling book, The World Peace Diet. Go get it. It's really good. Which has also been called one of the most important books of the 21st century, and it's even been published in 16 languages worldwide. So the World Peace Diet provides the foundation of a more conscious society based on the truth of the interconnectedness of all life. And Dr. Tuttle will make explicit the invisible connections between our culture, our food, and the source of our broad range of problems, and the way to a positive transformation in our individual and collective lives. Of course, anyone wishing to understand the big picture of our culture and why we have the unyielding dilemmas we face and how we can solve them will be fascinated by these provocative, challenging, and ultimately inspiring ideas. Don't miss this one. Share it with your friends and family. Question the status quo is ultimately the main message of this episode. And of course, stick around to the end of the episode for your health tip, which will be on self-care.
And a few quick updates. As of Monday, this past Monday, May 1st, we have released Eat to Thrive. And this is our revolutionary 4-stage wellness program that focuses on whole food, plant-based nutrition. And we also use herbal medicine to complement that to help you heal, cleanse, rebuild, and reconnect with your food, establish a deeper relationship, and develop sustainable eating habits.
Don't miss it. We've seen such wonderful results from our 2 test groups. Everybody's feeling great. Everybody's feeling strong. You guys are going to love this program.
And if you want more information on this program, you can visit soulandwonder.com/eat-to-thrive. Eat to Thrive.
There you go. Let's dive into Dr. Will Tuttle. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with Dr. Will Tuttle. Dr. Tuttle, thank you so much for joining us on our show. We're super happy to have you.
It's great to be here, Sara and Christopher. I'm delighted, and thank you everyone for listening in.
Yeah, we'd heard of you before, as we've been devout vegans for the past couple of years, and we'd heard of you in the movement. However, it wasn't until last year, towards the end, that we were able to go to one of your lectures at Buffalo State, and we were just so inspired by your performance with the piano, your lecture, your wife's artwork, all of that. We just left that lecture feeling so empowered and ready to change the world.
Simply profound, actually.
Well, thank you. It's really very heartening to hear that it touched you that way. That's the thing that, Madeline and I, as we travel not just the United States, but really we've been traveling globally. The idea is to plant seeds of vegan understanding, and that hopefully people will be able to make connections to their own inner wisdom, and then in their own way embrace and embody and live these ideas, because I think in many ways they've been stripped away from us from the time we're little infants. We've been taught that we have to abuse others in order to get the nutrients that supposedly we need, and we don't need to harm others, and that's an enormous liberation, I think, really, for our society and for ourselves.
Well, absolutely, and you guys are definitely succeeding at your mission, I would say.
Thanks.
And I do have to comment, I really enjoy how you guys do it as a pair and as a team, because as Sara and I work together as a team, it's really interesting to see the duo and how they work together and how you can balance each other, the yin and the yang. So it's really cool to see that, and we appreciate that a lot.
Right, yeah, definitely. Madeline's a huge part of everything that we do, and in fact, she's right here in the room right now. We're working on another book, and with some of her art. And we do. Last year we were on the road the entire year, but most years we're on the road at least half the year traveling.
Wow, that's incredible. That's awesome, though. Kudos to you guys. So, what does veganism mean to you? And I want to know, how did your vegan journey begin?
Yeah, well, veganism to me is our true nature, and it's not anything that is unusual or that we need to import. It's kind of like, in a way, when people perhaps at a certain point or in certain places, people were cannibals and they ate other people, and then you had people that said, well, we don't feel like that's right to do. We don't have a special name for those people who don't eat other people. They're just, we consider them kind of normal. They don't eat other people. We have a name for people who eat people that's like cannibals, And I think it's the same thing, when people are eating animals, it's a kind of a form of, in a way, of cannibalism, in the sense that it's unnecessary, causes a lot of suffering, it's devastating, it's not good really on any level. And people who don't do that, we have a name for them, vegans, but really there should be a name for the people who eat animals as some kind of a perversion. It's not something that we're not perverse in the sense that we choose to be perverse. It's just something we inherit, in a sense. We're born into this. So to me, veganism is love, it's respect, it's questioning the official stories of our society that are promoting exploitation and oppression and injustice, and it's also freedom. I think it's our basic sanity just expressing itself. I think the word veganism, in a sense, is sort of looking from the outside and putting a label on something that's really our natural wisdom, just spontaneously expressing. But in our society, it's quite a challenge to get to the point where this is happening, because all of us have been required from the time we're little infants to participate in mealtime rituals where we're taught to disconnect from this wisdom and empathy and sensitivity that is natural, and we're taught to put on armor and to see beings as mere objects, pieces of meat. Instead of seeing a being, we see just a thing. And that not only harms those beings, I mean, they're horribly abused because we harden our gaze and just see them as pork or bacon or chicken or something like that. But the harm is also to us. We create a whole society based on exploitation and violence, and this kind of competition where there's just an enormous amount of suffering to people who are also oppressed in the process. So for me, I was raised in a typical meal in the northeastern part of the United States, in a family that ate the typical meals, and we really never discussed it. I had no little light coming through the wall about the possibility of not eating animals. This was back in the 1950s in Massachusetts, and I remember my mother asking me, I asked my mother when I was about 7 years old, if everybody eats the way we're eating. Now, that basic question, I was getting old enough to kind of think about things, and I just wondered, and she said, oh, yeah, everybody eats the way we eat. This is what people eat. The kind of food we're eating is what everybody eats. And I said, everybody in the whole world? She said, yeah, pretty much. This is it. This is what people eat. And, this is kind of like, and I guess how a lot of people, really don't think outside of our national borders anyway, most of the time as Americans. But anyway, I thanked my mother. I said, okay, thanks, and then she left, and then she came back a few minutes later, and she said, that wasn't true. There are vegetarians. And that was the first time I ever heard that word. And I asked her what that was, and she basically said, well, it doesn't really matter. You'll never meet one. And so, she said, I've never met one. I'm a lot older than you are. I don't know where they get their protein. So the basic message I got from my mother was that these vegetarians are these poor people who are probably starving to death. They don't get enough protein. They're probably dragging themselves through the mud and have no energy. And, either that or they're exotic people that live on some other planet where people, are very different than we are, And the thing is, my mother was completely correct in the sense that I never did meet one. I never heard the word again. That was the end of it for many years. And in the meantime, I went away in my early teen years, to a summer camp in Vermont where I learned and actually participated in killing animals. It was a farm affiliated, this beautiful little cute organic dairy farm where nothing bad could ever happen. But I learned to kill chickens, to hold them down and cut their head off with an axe. And we learned actually how to kill the dairy cows too, because even though a cow would normally live at least 20 years, 20 to 30 years naturally, on any dairy, organic or not, when they reach about 5 years old at the most, they're killed because their production declines because they're kept pregnant and lactating, which breaks down the health of any female mammal very quickly. And so they just have to be killed and then replaced by one of their offspring typically. So I participated in that, and even though I didn't enjoy killing animals at all, to me it was horrible, but it was something that was absolutely necessary. It went right together with everything I learned in school, everything I learned in church, everything I learned watching television, everything I learned walking around the town and with my family and relatives. It all fit together. I knew that God gave us animals. They don't have a soul. They taste good. If you don't eat them, you're going to die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. And that's just basically how it is. That's the way that everything is set up. We're carnivores, right? That basic idea. We just have to eat meat. And we have to eat dairy to get enough calcium. Otherwise, our bones will probably just turn to rubber or something, and our teeth will fall out. So that was what I was taught, and I believed it, and I went away to college. But the good thing was that during the Vietnam War era, which is when I was there in 1971 until 1975 in Maine, I started questioning things. Everybody was questioning a lot of the official stories in the media about war and terrorism, so-called, and the role of human beings in war and how we were, what we were doing in Vietnam. And so I would go to protests and I would think about these things, but I never really made the connection to animals. I made the connection a little bit to environmental issues and the deforestation issues and so forth. But it was only when I left college, and that's the basic, I guess, message really in the World Peace Diet, is the power of community. The only reason anyone eats meat and dairy products and eggs, we only have one reason we do it. We do it because our community taught us to do that, and we're living in communities. We're very malleable. From the time we're born, our mothers and fathers and friends and neighbors and relatives and all the officials, everybody in our lives, we look to them for guidance. And anthropologists understand that the main ritual in any society in terms of really passing values and norms from generation to generation is the meals of any society. And so when we're sitting down and eating food, we're not just eating food, we're eating attitudes and ideas and basic orientation in the universe. And so it's very difficult for us to question this. It goes back, I think, in a sense, to perhaps earlier times when living in small groups and tribes, it would be impossible, really, for someone to say, well, I'm not going to eat the food that you're eating in the tribe. It'd be like, well, then you're not part of the tribe. You're nobody. You might as well go off and die by yourself, and the heck with you, And so anyone questioning the tribe's food, that's very, very threatening to oneself and to one's relationships. And so I think there's repercussions of these deep feelings and awarenesses within us even today. And so I was raised in that milieu. I was a part of that, of these communities of eating animal foods, and the most bonding situation was these meals. And the good news for me, actually, was that when I left home after graduating from Colby College in 1975, and I traveled with my brother, we thought we would go to California, and we ended up, after a few months walking, kind of on a spiritual pilgrimage, we ended up for a while in Tennessee. We walked actually all the way from Massachusetts to Tennessee.
Wow.
It took us quite a few months. We had no money. We were just walking. We actually walked right through Buffalo, I remember, and I'm back in 75 in the fall, and we walked from there. We headed south down through upstate New York and Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky. And then by the end of the year, we had reached Tennessee, and there was a community there called The Farm, which at that point was the largest commune in the world. It was basically, I guess, what you would call today a hippie commune, in the sense that the people were from California. They were mostly long-haired hippies, and they were all vegetarians, they said. They didn't eat meat. And we would today call them vegans, because no one heard of that word vegan back then, but they didn't eat dairy products or eggs either. And they did it primarily for two reasons. One was they were aware, because of Francis Moore LePay's book that had come out and other research, that eating meat and dairy products is very wasteful, and that we have people starving to death by the tens of thousands every day, and yet we're feeding grain that could feed these people to animals, and eating these animals. That's wasteful and inefficient use of resources. So they wanted to contribute to making a more peaceful world. So they were eating lower on the food chain so there would be enough food for everyone to eat. And so when they told me that, this light bulb went on, and I thought, that's true. I know that's true. We could feed everyone, actually, if we all would just eat a more plant-based diet. And then the other reason was just they talked a little bit about the routine mutilations and hyper-confinement and abuse that we humans mete out to animals used for food. And I hated to really open up to that. But once to me, once I think a human heart opens up to the reality of the hideous abuse of cows and pigs and chickens and fishes and other beautiful animals, what we do to them in order to eat them, it's not just the killing, but it's the confinement and mutilation and impregnation against their will and the stealing of babies. And I've really experienced this. I mean, Madeline and I have made a concerted effort to visit stockyards and slaughterhouses and factory farms and aquaculture operations, fish farms and things. And it's so much worse than you could ever even imagine. I mean, even seeing videos, you get a sense of it, but just smell it and just be there. It's these poor animals. They're terrified and they're in terrible pain their entire lives from birth until death. And so for me, it was this beautiful revelation where I suddenly saw the dark side very clearly of animal agriculture that's covered up in our society. We sort of pretend that it's not there. But at the same time, I had this amazing living example of 900 people. Every day we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, and they were always plant-based meals. And I was learning about all these new foods,
That's
I
incredible.
never, I never really, growing up I never really had eaten lentils before or soybeans. I didn't know what the heck a soybean was, tofu and all these things, I was learning about. And they made the very first soy ice cream that was ever made anywhere in the world. We made it at the farm. And it was, wasn't very good, but we thought it was pretty good.
Taste buds evolve.
Yeah, taste buds. That's what I figured. It's not causing any suffering, and people can eat, and we'll have this. And it's so great to see in the last 40 years how ice cream has really evolved too. So it's anyway. So it was that juxtaposition of the two realities. The reality of the misery and violence, and this reality of the fact that we can eat these delicious meals. And so, it's true. It took me probably a few weeks to kind of get used to eating more vegetables, grains, tofu. I actually always liked it, but there was, you don't necessarily have to eat a lot of tofu to be a vegan, certainly. But anyway, I started learning about all that, and that was it. And from that day, I was at the farm in the very end of December in 1975. I've never eaten meat again because I made the connection, and I thought, well, that's it, and that has been it. And then a few years later, I was in California about in 1980 by that point, and I finally really understood the routine abuse to cows and hens for dairy products and eggs. So I became a vegan in 1980. And then one other opportunity I had a few years later was when I shaved my head, and I was living as a Zen monk in Korea in 1984. And I realized, even though I had been a vegan for a few years, I realized I was in a community that had been practicing veganism for many, many centuries, probably for at least 700 years. And that this was an extension of a tradition that went back probably several thousand years at least, that people who are really serious and consequent about spiritual development, that they don't eat animal foods. They don't cause suffering to other living beings unnecessarily. And so besides the fact at this Songwangsa Zen monastery, there was no meat, dairy products, or eggs, no animal foods of any kind. There was also no leather, no wool, no silk, no products that were where you would harm animals. Even the fact that there were mosquitoes in the summer, and they were pretty thick, but we always had a net that we would put up in the meditation hall, and then if a mosquito got in, you would never kill the mosquito. You would, put her outside, or if you could, or something. So the whole idea was you just don't kill, because I think when our minds are making an effort to clarify and to free themselves from delusion and from cultural programming, which is puts us in bondage in many ways and is harmful, then we get very sensitive, I think, to violence. We begin to see that harming other living beings not only harms them, it harms ourselves, and it creates a hardness in our heart that really cuts us off from feeling the beauty and benevolence and celebratory nature of the world, and to really appreciate trees and flowers and birds and other human beings, and to appreciate ourselves, and to love ourselves, and to love our life, and to see our life as a beautiful gift and as an opportunity to grow and awaken and to serve the unfoldment of something on this planet that is beautiful and creative. That's what we're designed for. Our purpose is to awaken. And yet I realized when I was at Songwangsa Monastery, and we were meditating from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night every day for months, that I had been raised in a society where my mind had been colonized by a toxic program that was sort of without my permission, was just injected into me from birth, primarily through the foods, by very well-meaning people. Not to say my parents and teachers and doctor weren't well-meaning, but they had been similarly indoctrinated and abused by a system that goes back about 10,000 years of this herding mentality of commodifying other beings and creating systems nested systems, economic, governmental, religious, and so forth, that all support violence and abuse and domination, and that create injustice and inequality. So I realized I could see this clearly. I think I'm so grateful that there are people in the past who have made efforts at spiritual awakening so that they can free themselves from the delusion of of being fundamentally separate, and to see that all life is connected, and that as long as I'm just acting out of the delusion of being a separate self, where I'm harming others and seeing them as instruments to get what I want for myself, that I'm creating misery for myself and them, for everyone. Underlying that, there's this basic strife. And the Sanskrit word is samsara. It means suffering that never ends, because it's based on the delusion. And so through meditation, I realized that it's possible to quiet the mind to the point where there's a receptivity to an understanding that what we are is not a physical thing, just a physical body, that we're consciousness, actually, that's eternal, and that is of the nature of joy and creativity and understanding and wisdom and freedom, that's really who we are, what we are, and that we're here, in a sense, expressing through a physical vehicle for just a few decades. It's not a long time. And so to use our time here to the best possible advantage from that perspective, so that we're awakening and contributing and learning more about how we can thrive and help others on their path as well. So when I came back from Korea after that meditation experience, I felt like I had these roots of veganism that went much deeper. It was no longer sort of just a sort of a rational thing that makes sense. It is very rational. Veganism is ultimately extremely wonderful in the sense that it makes sense rationally and logically. But I realized at a deeper level, it's our true nature, that if we're eating animal foods, it's always indicative of a disconnect that's been forced on us, really, without our permission. And that the great good news is that we can question that as individuals, and then we can share these ideas with other people, which is why I love your work. What you're doing is helping people to question that toxic program, and then provide an example of another way of living. And I think that opens the doorway for creating a world where we don't have the kinds of problems that we're having today, which seem completely insoluble. And they are insoluble. As long as we're eating animal foods, the actions and the mentality, we cannot solve these problems. We have to, as a society, go vegan, which sounds like like we're doing something that's not natural, but it's like not being cannibals anymore, just being, living how we're intended to live here, and waking up out of this. It's really a imposed hypnotic trance that's continually reinforced through advertising and through cultural conditioning and through the daily meal rituals that we have with our relatives and things. So thanks so much again for the work you're doing, and that kind of summarizes, I guess, how I got into it and what I think veganism is.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing, and we appreciate it, and you've really inspired us to break out and share a lot of this information with the world. And again, what you're doing is very profound, and your work is brilliant. So
we relate to you on a profound level in the sense of, that you started asking questions. I myself was also 6 or 7 years old at the dinner table asking. I remember looking at my dog and looking at the pork on my plate and asking my dad, so why do we eat this animal, but we don't eat that animal?
That's the $100 question.
And my parents didn't know what to say. They just said, we just do. We just eat this way. I don't know why, but we do. And they didn't even tell me they were vegetarians. I had to figure that out when I got out of high school. But, much like you started asking questions. You started finding the answers within yourself and being guided along the path of other people who had been asking the same questions. And that's what happened with Christopher and I. And it just, I mean, it's almost like it just erupts, it explodes, and it's just completely undeniable that that's the path that needs to be taken at that point. And it's so hard to explain to someone who's questioning you about your veganism of the process or the method, because there's still that gap in consciousness, which I'm sure you've talked to or heard of Melanie Joy, the psychologist. And it's just it's a very interesting transformation. But all of these topics that you've mentioned, I know that you cover them in the World Peace Diet, and you cover them very detailed, especially I wanted to mention this to you before we move on, but how you said you and your wife would go to these factory farms and agricultural areas and see how it's much worse than we're even looking at on a screen with a video. And that was something that you were able to do, was with your words paint a much more detailed picture for the reader to see. Because although I'd seen a lot of documentaries and I'd seen a lot of activist videos, the words that were in your book definitely took it to another level that even for myself, who was already a practicing vegan, had to kind of take a breath a few times before each chapter and just kind of like regroup and, center. And I just love how you do that.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's I think it's important really to see that veganism is really a critique of an existing system that is devastating on every level, but it's more than that. It's not just a critique; it's also a solution. There's an alternative that we have, which is so important to understand. And I think it's really essential, really, for all of us, if we're interested in living a life of authenticity and meaning, that we, do the difficult thing, which is to sort of, like in the Wizard of Oz, just, pull the curtain back and really see that it's all an illusion. That we're told that somehow we're good, kind, loving people. We like to have a good steak, and that's just great. These animals are here for us to eat. This is all on the up and up. This is the way it should be. And to really look behind and see the utter vicious reality of the abuse. I mean, how it's devastating to the people involved. The workers have the highest rates of perpetrator-induced traumatic stress disorder. They're stabbing animals all day. They're impregnating them on rape racks. The amount of sexual perversion and sexual abuse, the amount of horrible just abuse of the animals that is going on. And it's, and the interesting thing for me, being a vegan now for almost 40 years, and from the very beginning, doing, research and trying to promote veganism, to see that there's no reason for us to be engaging in this behavior. It's devastating on every level. It's far more traumatic than we realize. And even for me, after 37 years of being a vegan, I learn more literally every day that reconfirms it even more. I mean, it's and the other neat thing is that like last year I think we broke a record. We gave, I think, close to 300 lectures in 1 year. I mean, that's almost a lecture. It's like, usually we do maybe 150, but we did, so many. And so the point is, I've given, thousands of lectures and taken, questions and I've never heard anyone ever say something that made me think, maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't be a vegan. There's like it's not it's just on every level you can think of. It lines up, from the point of view of our health, point of view of our spirituality and psychology, from our culture, from the environment, from the animals, from any angle you can possibly look at. And so the underlying idea here, I think, is that we find somehow within ourselves the core of who we are, and once we do that, then there's an enormous release of energy. I think we suddenly feel, gosh, everything I was told about this is actually devastating to not only animals and the earth, but to myself. That when I'm abusing animals, I'm also actually a victim of abuse myself. I'm only eating these foods because I've been forced to have my own intelligence and sensitivity reduced so that I can do this and participate and pay people. Because I'm telling you, if you go to a stockyard or one of these places and you see the workers there, they're so shut down and their hearts are so closed. There's just this ugliness, absolute ugliness in every single aspect of animal agriculture. The way it's done, it's just this domination of nature. And these monocropped fields where Monsanto, just this GMO. That's where most of the GMOs are grown and fed are to animals, and they're killing fields for everything else. And visiting sanctuaries, we've had a chance to go to sanctuaries, which are places that people don't know where animals are rescued somehow. They escape the system: cows, pigs, chickens, and other animals. Yeah, and we've been to sanctuaries in the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, all over the place. And one of the things I've learned is that people who are running sanctuaries say that, in the last 10 years or so, there's been this proliferation of backyard operations where people say, okay, you're right, factory farming is bad, so we're going to only eat meat from small backyard operations where the animals are well treated and it's free range organic, kind of thing. And that so many animals that end up at these sanctuaries that come from small backyard operations are horribly abused, even very often as bad or worse than the large-scale commercial operations. So there isn't any way we can kill animals or steal their secretions that is not harming them. We always have this sense of owning them. They're our property. We're taking from them what is not given. We're breaking our trust, betraying them. And I think it's time for us to realize that it's absolutely unnecessary. There are no nutrients that we need to be healthy that we need to harm animals to get. We can get them all in other ways from plant-based foods. They come from plant-based foods. They come from plants. If we eat animals foods, we're just getting the nutrients from plants, and we're getting all the misery plus all the toxins that concentrate. To really understand this clearly, it doesn't happen overnight, but I think it's the greatest effort anyone can make, really, in terms of health and liberation for oneself and the world, to make that effort. And no one can make that effort for someone else. That's why it's important for us to emphasize, I think, the importance that everyone really make an effort to understand and not just believe the lies that are constantly being thrown in our direction by a society that's based on a bunch of lies, a bunch of misinformation that is devastating. I love the words of Voltaire. He said, if we believe absurdities, we will commit atrocities. And I think that underlies the whole thing. It's, believing absurdities is one thing, but the problem is that it tends to push us into doing things that are so abusive to others and to ourselves.
Absolutely. And I'd like to play devil's advocate for a second really quickly. Sure. Obviously, I'm not of this perspective, but so what if I want to raise my own dairy cow or my own chickens for slaughter and for eggs? What's the spiritual or psychological ramifications of me making that decision to have Betty, my dairy cow, and Fred and Joe and Susan, my chickens,
Well, the thing is, I've worked a lot with people in India who and they even have a more extreme foundation for this kind of agriculture. I mean, talking to people in India and saying, they say, we've been doing this for thousands of years. The cow is part of the family. We take some milk and we feed her, and here she is. And we take care of them. We don't kill them. I mean, it's really like it couldn't get any better than this, right? And yet quite honestly, you go to India. I have a friend in fact, we're going to India ourselves in a few months, but who went around India and went to people who have cows like this. They have one or two cows, and they get the dairy, and it's all very, looks all so perfect on the outside. And he said, you just ask two questions, and the people get very uncomfortable. One question is, so what do you do with the male calves that are born? Because a cow, people think that cows just give milk, it's comical. I mean, that we don't think any more deeply. And it's really, Madeline and I were visiting a woman, very intelligent, in her 60s, had a PhD, and we were talking about some of these things, and she said, wait a minute, are you telling me that cows don't just give milk? It's kind of like, us, like a woman, when she reaches, 13 years old, she just starts squirting milk everywhere, for no reason. And they don't just give milk. They give milk like we do. When they give birth to a little calf, then they give milk. So if you want to have your own milk and have your own cow, I mean, first of all, you're going to have to feed that cow, and that's going to take a lot of land and grain to do. And then the cow's not going to give any milk unless you impregnate her. So how do you impregnate her? Oh, well, you can try to have a bull and do it that way. That's not easy. Normally that's not done anymore. You have a veterinarian comes by and does it. I talked to a woman who said, she did this for a while. She had a few cows, and she said, it was amazing when the cows heard the sound of they knew what the veterinarian's pickup truck sounded like. And when they heard that pickup truck coming, they ran as far away as they could in the corner of the whole farm, because they did not want to be raped. But that happens. I mean, it's not a pleasant experience for a cow to be impregnated by a human. And then, of course, I also met another woman who lived next to an operation in upstate New York where they had bulls that they masturbated to get the sperm, and she said they suffer terribly. It's not a pleasant process for them either. And so this is what's going on behind the curtain. And then, so you're masturbating the males, you're impregnating in the females, and I won't go into it, but it's pretty brutal how they do it. And then, anyway, then she, after 9 months, she gives birth to this calf, and so now the milk starts flowing. Well, you do not want that milk going to the calf. I mean, that's your milk. So the calf you give, and on any operation, organic or not, they're giving soy milk, believe it or not, to the calves. If they're going to live, they're going to allow to live, but only typically 1 out of 4 you're going to let live, because what are you going to do? Feed these calves? I mean, they have to be impregnated every year, or their milk is going to dry up. So they're impregnated every year, and so they have to kill the calves, and they do it all the time. I mean, they just kill them and bury them. I mean, that's basically it. And most dairy operations, they just shoot them and dig a hole, bury them, and that's it. I mean, if the veal market's high enough, then they can auction them off. And then 1 out of the 4 or 5, usually they kill her when she's around 5. So at that point, she's usually had 4 babies, and they've been all stolen. And we've also heard the cries. I mean, I don't have to tell people, but living in an RV, we sometimes just happen to be camping within earshot of some kind of dairy operation, and I've heard them calling all night, just bellowing for their babies that are stolen. And we've talked to them, and they say, "Oh yeah, they do it for a week sometimes, but they get over it." And then after a few babies, they don't do it anymore, so they get over it. It's not that bad. I mean, that's the mentality, of people who are using these animals, and then the males that they send off to slaughter or they kill, they don't like to think about that. And then the females, they also have to, except one they'll save, the other the females are also killed for veal. There's just so many babies that are created on dairy operations, and so that's going on behind the scenes. And then what are you going to do? And the other question they ask, so the 2 questions to ask, this guy asked in India that they got uncomfortable is, what do you do with the males? And they didn't want to talk about it. They said, well, we send them off to market, and that means they send them off to be slaughtered. And what do you do? The other question was, what do you do with the cows when their milk production declines? Because that's going to happen. Even in the best of situations, after they get maybe after 10 or 12 years, they're not going to give any more milk. even probably fewer years. So in India, there's a terrible problem because what they do at that point is they either send them to market or they just let them go. And so there's millions of cows in India that are basically half starving, wandering the countryside, eating garbage, and nobody takes care of them, and it's a terrible situation for them. And now they're being used very often. They're brought to states where they're used for leather. So the underlying idea is you can't do it in a way that's not stealing from them what has not been given to you. I mean, the milk is designed for their calves. The milk itself has a whole litany of substances in it, like casein is an obvious one, IGF-1 growth hormone is another thing, estrogen is another. I mean, those three things. I mean, the high amounts of estrogen, IGF-1 growth hormone, and casein. These are three extremely toxic substances to human beings. We are not designed to have those things going into our bodies and running through our bloodstream. Estrogen, it pushes, like in Japan, and we've seen this over and over again, when people adopt the Western diet of dairy products, the age of menarche, which is usually around 17 or 18 years old, naturally goes down to like 12 or 11 or 13, whatever, because of all the estrogen in dairy products. Think of all the problems that causes when you have girls who are still 12 years old mentally. Now they can get pregnant and have a little baby, and that shouldn't happen until they're older. But dairy pushes this, teenage pregnancies, all these things, all the whole heartache. Endless social problems because of that. And then the casein is a substance that we don't have the enzyme renin like calves have to break down, and so we have this gigantic protein coming into our body. It's the driving force behind breast cancer, prostate cancer, type 1 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes, actually. Autoimmune diseases of various kinds are now linked directly to casein. So, that's what we're giving our children. We're giving them casein. They're not designed for that. And even as adults, we're not designed for that, besides the lactose. And then IGF-1 growth hormone, again, it's a carcinogenic substance that we're not designed to have. So, this is even if the milk is totally organic and so forth, which it's very hard to find, because cows, if they're eating anything and drinking anything, they're going to concentrate all the toxins, heavy metals, PCBs, dioxins, and all of the waste that's just in our world, and that very often is on the grass and grains that they're eating. It concentrates more than anywhere else in milk. I mean, milk in any mammal is where most of the toxins will end up. So, because of the fat and the way the systems are. So, this is a really toxic substance, and also people should know that dairy very often products their feed, the dairy cow's feed, is enriched with fish meal, and fish meal today is probably, again, one of the most toxic things you could ever imagine. And so we're getting all that in dairy. And the same thing goes with hen production. I could basically say the same thing with chickens. Chickens should be living their lives roaming freely in the jungles of Southeast Asia, and they still are. That's where they are. They're living there. We pull them out of their natural habitat. We bring them here into a cold climate and confine them, and then we have people say, "Well, but then my chickens are happy," and I say, "Okay, your chickens are happy." So what does that mean? Do you have any males? Oh, no, we don't have any males. They're all females. We don't want any males. So already you have this ridiculous situation where there's no males, so they don't have any possibility to live their natural way they did for millions of years, and they've been genetically manipulated to give a lot more eggs than they normally would, and there's just the same with dairy. There's no nutrients in eggs that are healthy for us that we need to eat. It's the most concentrated cholesterol in any food there is in an egg. And so why eat it? Why cause these poor animals to go through the hard? It's hard to lay eggs. It's hard to give birth to a baby, and the animals have to work very hard to lay an egg and to give birth to a baby, and then we steal it and we say we want more. And it's this gross domination of the feminine principle, of the feminine force, of giving birth to young babies, of nurturing and loving those babies. We steal that. We abuse these females. The fact that we can even look at that and not see the violence shows how, as a society, how blind we have become, how hardened our sensibilities have become. People look back, 150 years ago and talk about slavery and say, gosh, that was really a dark time, how terrible, how they abused these people. But, they didn't see it. I mean, they thought, well, they're happy. They're out there picking cotton. What's the problem? And so the fact that we can't see it shows how blind, it just shows that we ourselves have been enslaved. I mean, only slaves would enslave others and not realize what they're doing, That's basically what it is.
And you know what? It's really a lose-lose situation for everybody involved. Us as the consumer, and then obviously, as we mentioned, the animals. And,
right.
The health aspect of it. If we just look on the other end, when we start to begin to adopt a plant-based lifestyle, plant-based diet, and eat this way, and even after a couple weeks, I mean, we've seen clients of our own after 2 weeks have tremendous results.
Even just a few days.
And
right.
To see that then evolve into a few months, I mean, people reversing diabetes, and there's cancers being cured, and it's again
right.
that doesn't happen for everybody, but again, if you adopt this lifestyle, the tremendous benefits that you reap from it is incredible.
Yeah, I know. That's so true. And to me, that's one of the most beautiful aspects of this. It's like, for me, when I first went vegan, I remember thinking, well, even if I am a little weaker or whatever, it's worth it. I'm just going to, because I don't want to cause the suffering to these animals. And then I realized as time went on that it's just the opposite. Extra pounds go away. So the ideal, really, in nature. I have a good friend. He's an architect, and he's become a vegan too. And he says, if you really look carefully in nature, nature is brilliant in design. Design of systems, of bodies, and all. And he said every system in nature is designed to maximize strength and minimize weight, to make things light and strong. And it's like, veganism is really this way of living, for at least, from my experience, is where it just maximizes those things. I mean, I feel like now I'm in my mid-60s, and I feel like I'm lighter and stronger than ever. And that there's a sense of just natural joy that comes from the harmony and energy that comes from eating this way. And I think it's important as vegans to really kind of educate ourselves so that we're eating mainly organic, whole food diet, so that we're eating good vegan, because you can eat vegan food that's not very healthy with GMOs and with toxic preservatives and a lot of fat and chemicals, and it's good. I mean, it's better than eating animal foods, but I think it's really, at least this is our experience. Like Madeline, I feel so fortunate because Madeline in many ways is a real purist, and didn't want to have foods. When she was very young, she had problems physically because of environmental toxins, and so she got very savvy about reading labels and not eating things that had preservatives and chemicals and artificial flavors. And so when we got together, the vegan way of living really got blended with the organic whole foods way of living in our household. But the food gets so delicious that way. I mean, it's amazing when you take really good ingredients, and now we were on the road for 17 years in an RV, so the only thing we could grow ourselves was sprouts all those years.
Very good for you, though.
Yeah, they're good for you. We loved it, but now we can actually have a garden. We've planted a lot of fruit trees. We have a food forest actually, with berries and trees and vegetables and herbs, all growing together in community. And we have so many birds, and it's just so beautiful to see all the hummingbirds and birds and butterflies and bees and things that are in our yard, that are much more than anywhere else in where we live. And so it's this whole like little ecosystem that is like a space of love, a place where life can really happen, where we're building up the soil with our compost, we're putting our love into the garden every afternoon for a few hours, and then the garden responds with all this delicious food. And then when we eat that, it's so energizing, and it's healing, and it's joyful, it's beautiful. That's life feeding life. I remember being on Maui with a friend who has a center there that he built with his own hands, and he planted a breadfruit tree like 20 years ago, and the breadfruit tree is now this gigantic tree. And he said, when you look at my body, he said at least 2/3 of the cells of my body are made from that breadfruit tree. He said that the breadfruit tree. I mean, breadfruits are amazing. They're these huge. They're like potatoes. You can steam them, you can fry, you can bake, you can all these different ways you can eat breadfruit. And that's what he does. And the breadfruit usually it only gives fruits one season, but this one gives pretty much year round. And so he's always getting these. So he loves this tree. The more he loves it and builds the soil up, the more the tree responds and gives him more and more fruits. And he said, when I heard that story, I thought, when people say they're eating meat, they're saying, well, I'm part of the food chain. It's life feeding life. I thought, no, that's ridiculous. That's death feeding life. That's misery. But this is life feeding life. When we're loving the earth and loving the trees and loving and supporting them, and they're giving us of their fruits, and we're thriving and they're thriving. I mean, birds are thriving. Everybody thrives. I mean, it's a win-win. This is available to us. I mean, we have easily have the technology to feed everyone on this planet on a fraction of the land using techniques that would build soil and use a minimum of petroleum, a minimum of water, a minimum of land. We could easily allow the habitats, rainforests, oceans, lakes, and streams to rejuvenate and return, and wildlife and cows could live like they did for millions of years in the steppes of Asia, and pigs and chickens and turkeys and all these animals could live. I mean, and all the animals, we're right now in a massive extinction of species. We're losing, according to some biologists, over 100 species a day are going extinct because primarily of animal agriculture and the deforestation and destruction of ocean habitat, which is all driven by people taking out their wallets and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs. It destroys not just these animals that we're eating, it destroys the whole web of life and the climate equilibrium, and water and depletion and water pollution and air pollution are massive problems that are all driven by animal agriculture. So the beauty is that our health is interconnected with the health of the ecosystem, and if we move to a plant-based way of living, not only are the foods healthier, the ecosystem is healthier, the water is cleaner, the air is cleaner, the climate is how it's supposed to be, and then our minds clarify, and then we can elect Congress and Senate and President and all these people, and we would have the wisdom to elect people who defend and stand up for the earth and for future generations and for children. But if we're eating animal foods and we're eating torture and cruelty and war, what kind of politicians are we going to vote for? We're going to vote for those kind of politicians. Of course we are. That's what we do. We don't know any better because we're asleep. We're eating foods of violence, and so we create systems of violence. We have no other way to operate because that's what's in us as the food is our most intimate connection with nature, and so the message underlying all this is that it's right available to each one of us, and the only difficulty really, I think, is in overcoming the sense of being part of a system and having a self-image of someone who eats them in a certain way. But the really good news, I think, right now is that as veganism grows, as this movement grows, the more people who go vegan, the easier it is for more people to go vegan. So it's kind of a snowball effect that is happening. I really see it happening. There are more and more vegan products, restaurants, meetup groups, blogs, information available. Young people especially are moving quickly in this direction. And as we travel to China, like I'm going again, we've been several times to Korea and Vietnam and Singapore, as well as the Middle East, to Dubai and Africa and all over Europe. And we see meetup groups and restaurants that are vegan, and we see, young people and older people too, actually, and people who are spiritually oriented, are making these connections, and so it's a real positive expansion of this consciousness. And the whole question, of course, is is it going to happen in time? Are we going to be able to? That's the thing. I mean, this is the big question on planet Earth to me right now. Is will we be able to evolve in our understanding and behavior away from the violence of animal agriculture to save ourselves and the other animals, or not? And I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, it's such a critical time. These aren't just intellect. These aren't just this sort of abstract concepts you and I are talking about. These have such. There's nothing more important. I mean, if anything is important to understand, like this is it. Really, I mean, this is critically important to understand.
Yeah, and we're really at a crossroads at the moment, and it's encouraging to hear that, you're traveling to Asian countries and that you're seeing more people adopt this type of lifestyle. And Sara and I were just in backpacking South America. We actually were in Africa for a few years serving with the Peace Corps. And at that point, we didn't really, we weren't in tune with the vegan lifestyle. But as we've then traveled more, we were in Colombia recently, and we were so surprised to see the amount of people that, number one, knew what vegan was, and number two, actually there was vegan restaurants available with things besides just a salad.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say the cuisines of these countries, for the most part, are plant-based. I mean, traditionally, before the incursion of colonial domination and bringing in other ways of eating, it was really these warrior societies that expanded into Europe, and from Europe to Africa and South America and Southeast Asia, that brought meat and dairy and much more violent way of living. And I think a lot of it is really getting back to some of the basic wisdom of the indigenous people of these regions, they were much more plant-based actually originally.
Absolutely. Now, if one of our listeners is considering adopting a vegan lifestyle, what would be your advice to them?
I think there's two main things. One would be to really make an effort to understand the ideas that we're talking about here, the sort of the why ideas, and why it's important to question eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, because that provides the fuel for the journey. When we really understand the devastating consequences of taking out my wallet and paying for something that looks very looks normal. I mean, it's what everybody, some piece of meat or piece of cheese or egg or something, or order something in a restaurant. We're encouraged to do that all the time. But to see the devastating impact of that, so to make an effort to understand that, number one, and then number two would be more to focus on the how question, and I think in that case, to try to make friends with someone, or go or look online, or maybe find a local vegan meetup group. Where I can learn how to substitute what I'm eating now for plant-based versions of the same recipes, or similar or different recipes that will be satisfying. So, like, what am I going to eat now? Like, normally I eat eggs and cereal in the morning with some whatever, and what am I going to eat now for breakfast? Or normally I eat such and such for lunch. And what am I going to eat now? What do I eat for dinner? To actually get into the practical dimension of veganizing the foods that I'm eating. And there's two ways to do it. I mean, one is there are plant-based versions of almost any food you can imagine. So that's one way that's kind of quick and easy in the sense that you can go and buy vegan cheese and buy vegan butter and buy vegan eggs and meat and burgers and all these things and just sort of make those substitutions. And then, of course, what I recommended earlier, I think that those are good maybe transitional foods, but as we continue on, I think it's really helpful to get to grains, vegetables. One of the problems I think that I just like to emphasize is that a lot of people think that moving to a vegan diet or plant-based way of eating is it's not good to eat carbohydrates, or that you have to just eat a lot of vegetables. And the problem with that, I mean, vegetables are extremely healthy and they're delicious. I mean, I love vegetables, but there's not a lot of carbohydrates or calories in vegetables typically. So a lot of people have a problem, I think, where they feel like they're not getting enough protein or not getting enough sustenance. They lose weight, which is good, but then at a certain point they think, gosh, I'm feeling a little weaker. So, I think it's important to be sure you're eating enough carbohydrates, starchy foods, grains, potatoes, sweet potatoes, pasta. And, these foods really provide the foundation of energy so that you can run up a mountain or whatever you need to do for the day. And the vegetables provide the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients, which are really important, and fruits also do as well. And vegetables are high in protein also, and some nuts and seeds. But I mean, just to make sure you're eating enough carbs, that's an important. A lot of people don't do that, and then they don't really thrive, and they don't know why. They're not getting enough calories. And you won't gain weight on carbs.
We're so glad that you mentioned that. It's something that we've reiterated many times on our podcast episodes. I'm a huge grain lover, and we are very anti-low carb diet people, we're trying to spread the education on why carbohydrates are good for you, what they do in the body on a biological level, and it's just there's so much misinformation out there about carbohydrates. So thank you for sharing that bit of information.
And also to mention, I'm really happy that you shared Meetup, because Meetup is a very powerful tool that I don't know if a lot of people that are aware of, but it's a great online community where people can reach out to others in any topic that you're really interested in. But we've found vegan meetups to be very informative, and just getting together with like minds and talking to people and creating that sense of community, I think, is super important. And also to mention that, you were talking about veganizing foods, and that's what we saw. We saw that as a very important thing, so people can actually enjoy their normal comfort foods, but in a plant-based way. And that's what we did with our Eat to Thrive program, and we've had a lot of incredible results because of that, and people really sticking to a plant-based diet.
Which even supports the no refined sugars, no refined flours, no oils standpoint. And so you're kind of taking that veganism up to a superhuman level.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes I forget, that, to say, not eating refined products and all that. But yeah, that's so important in terms of just having a body that's clean and energized and doesn't get sick hardly ever, and that's, I think, at a deep level we want to be happy. We want to enjoy our lives, and I think to be effective, to be creative, and really to be happy, it's really important to be healthy. And the beauty is on a vegan diet is that it's the foundation of health. We're eating what we're sort of designed to be eating. Our bodies run on glucose, and our brains run on glucose. This basic sugar, which comes from carbohydrates. And there's no glucose in meat, and there's no glucose in dairy products to speak of. I mean, very little, none in eggs. So if we're eating animal-based foods, we're not getting the basic energy that we need. Our brain runs on glucose. I mean, it's like 4 or 5% of our body weight, and it uses about like 30% of our energy. It runs the brain, and it can only run on glucose. So if we're not eating something that breaks down to glucose, which grains and legumes and vegetables really do, then, and potatoes and sweet potatoes, I mean, that gives us the energy to run our brains, to run our muscles. And this is, I think, one of the reasons you're finding now that athletes are moving more and more toward a vegan way of living. People are, long distance runners always knew you had to carb up if you're going to, run 20 miles. But we're understanding that, this is the best way to build muscle. That we have the strongest people in the world now are vegans. We have some of the greatest runners, triathletes, everything. People are realizing that this is to not only survive, but to really thrive at a very high level, physically and mentally, that a plant-based way of living is by far the best, especially one where we're not bringing in toxins that we have to get rid of. I mean, there's already enough toxins just living in the modern world. To do the best we can to purify our water, but also that the food that we're eating is clean. And the other thing is, I think, like you said, the taste buds do evolve, and we find that foods just become more and more delicious because we're appreciating them more. And I think that's an important part of the whole thing. I talk about in the World Peace Diet, I make the connection with sex. I say, if someone can go to a prostitute and have sex, but it's sort of like, it's not the same as having sex with someone you really love, in terms of actual, anything worth meaningful. And it's similar, I think, with food. If we're eating food that we really love, and we love to think where it came from, and the fields and gardens, and that someone was working, they weren't using toxic pesticides, they were building the soil, and that eating animal foods is like, it's even worse than going to a prostitute. It's like rape. You're actually killing someone and getting the pleasure from that. I mean, what could be worse? No wonder we have fast food. No wonder people don't want to think about where their food comes from. They don't want to think about anything. We just want to stay shallow, go through our lives, not contemplate, not look and feel deeply. Because if we did, our whole exposure to our own hypocrisy or violence would be obvious. And so we have to, as a society, stay shallow. And if we stay shallow and don't look deeply and feel deeply, then it's a perfect setup for large corporate and financial institutions that want us to just go to war without questioning and buy their products without questioning and cut down rainforests without questioning and allow people to starve without questioning. I mean, what veganism is, it's about caring, it's about looking deeply, it's about making connections, and it's about acting responsibly, which actually is the pathway to joy. If I'm going to avoid responsibility, that's actually a pathway to unhappiness. And everybody who thinks about this a little bit will realize how true that is, that if I want to avoid responsibility, then I'm going to do things, but it does come back. I mean, the old saying, as you sow, you reap. I call it the boomerang effect. I mean, things do come back. And so if we want to build a beautiful relationship with another person, it's not going to happen if we don't act responsibly. And if we want to build a beautiful relationship in our life, it's the same thing. If we think about how our actions affect others and do the best we can, that all of the actions that radiate from our choices and our thoughts and feelings are blessing others and helping them to be happier and freer, then we're creating a whole field of joy and love in our world, and it will bless them, but it also it blesses us too. I mean, that's the funny thing. The irony is, of course, the most skillful way to be selfish is to be unselfish. I mean, if we try to make others happy, we create a foundation where we find, and the most, and to try to, say, well, it's my right. You can be a vegan if you want to. That's your choice, but it's my right to eat meat because I want to do that. And what that's saying is that, okay, so my right is more important than the right of the animal to her life, the right of the slaughterhouse worker to her life or his life, the right of the hungry person who's starving because I want to eat the grain that could have fed them, the future generation person who's going to die because I want to eat this, and the ecosystems and the wild animals that are killed because we want to get rid of them because we have cows here now and no wild horses allowed anymore. I mean, every time I want my rights and what I want based on just a narrow culturally indoctrinated perspective, we create misery for others, and it comes back. And we find that people that eat the most meat and dairy have the highest rates of everything: diabetes, osteoporosis, liver disease, kidney disease, heart disease, as well as depression, anxiety, chronic pain. That's it. I mean, that's Alzheimer's disease, dementia. These things, they all go together. And war, and the United States eats more meat. We have more people in prison than any country in the world. So I think we have to realize that these are the connections that if we want to create a world of freedom and joy, we can do it. The price we have to pay is just that we don't harm others, that we allow animals to live their lives, don't eat them, let them celebrate their lives, and allow people to have livelihoods that don't require them to horribly abuse animals, and that as we actually act on that and not just theorize about it, and this is, I think, where the progressive political movements and spiritual movements really need to wake up. We have to start talking about this and making this part of our activism. That we want to be a peace activist or an activist for women's rights or anti-racist or whatever it is. That we're vegan is the foundation, in the sense that we're living this in our day-to-day life, what we say that we would like to see in the world. And I think more and more people are understanding this, and we still have a way to go, but I think that this is the basic wisdom, that we can't keep avoiding this any longer.
Absolutely. And, we could not have said that better ourselves. Thank you for bringing all of those topics up to the table.
Oh, you're welcome.
So where could our listeners find you if they're interested in following your work?
Well, we have a website, worldpeacediet.com, and then my name, Will Tuttle, so that willtuttle.com. And so we have our lecture schedule is there, new articles and essays that are being written are there. Books. We have a new book, actually, it just came out, called Your Inner Islands, The Keys to Intuitive Living. I actually just wrote it. I mean, Madeline's art and my writing, and then there's also a CD that goes with it of music. It's like a multimedia course on developing spiritual intuition. So it's not directly vegan. It's vegan sort of in and through it, but it's not only about that, but it's more about spiritual intuition. I don't have the website made for that yet, but it'll be up in the next day or two. And it just came out, like a week ago.
That includes your musical composure with the piano and everything?
Yeah. The book is just the book, but then there's a companion CD, which you can either download or you can just or you can buy, or however you want to do it. You can get it on iTunes or Google Play or through us. There's exercise that go with the music, and then there's also Madeline's paintings, which are either come actually in the book or they're right there on our website too. You can just look at them as part of the exercise. There's exercises that use music and art as part of the training and tuition. So that's there, and then also we have links to YouTube videos of Madeline's cooking and our garden and those kinds of things too. So we've been pretty busy with touring the last year. So we're now just beginning to do some more videos and things. But that's basically it. If people want to go there, they can. We have a veg inspiration for the day if you're interested. So every day there's an inspiring quote from the World Peace Diet that comes into your inbox, and we're happy to be in touch. And we also have a training, the World Peace Diet Facilitator Training. We've had quite a few people go through that, and that's a good way if you just want to go deeper into these ideas and become a facilitator. And then we've had a lot of people put on World Peace Diet study groups in their community and help build vegan community and create veg fests and create vegan restaurants and sanctuaries and groups of all kinds. It's really been great to see. I mean, Kip Anderson, who created What the Health and
Cowspiracy,
he went through our training. A lot of people have gone on to create humane education groups and sanctuaries and billboard campaigns of all kinds of things have gone through our training. So it's really great to see what people end up doing after they go through. So it's wonderful. I mean, the whole idea is to just help each other, really, just to help each other so difficult. I mean, being born in a society, we're all abused, we're all wounded, we're all hurt by this, and so we're all healing ourselves, and we can help each other in the process. And like you said, the meetup movements that are happening, and there's so many great things happening, podcasts and things. And so if they go to worldpeacediet.com or worldtuttle.com, you can see some of the things that we're doing, and we're happy to collaborate with people in whatever way we can.
Extraordinary. Thank you so much, Dr. Tuttle. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on to our show.
Great. All right. Thank you both. It's been wonderful. And keep up the great work you're both doing.
Thank you. One word, brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant. And if you read The World Peace Diet or any of his other books, he expresses these messages and topics that he brought to the table just as eloquently through writing as he does through speaking. And you're going to learn so much information. So please check out those books. You won't regret it.
And now, the health tip of the episode.
Ding, ding, ding. Self-care. I know you're probably wondering, wait a minute, all our health tips are usually herbs, supplements, foods, things of that sort, but we're going to start throwing out to you more life coaching health tips because the mind and the heart and the soul are just as important as the body. So, what does it mean, self-care? That's me time. That's you time. And sometimes that's often viewed as self-indulgent, and the correlation between the way we love ourselves and the way our lives pan out is often unnoticed. But self-care is so important. This improves our health, this lowers our stress, and it creates a more positive environment for us to live and thrive. So, all of us have different self-care routines, and some of you might have none at all, and you might be saying, I'm too busy for that. But I'm going to be honest with you, when I hear I'm too busy for that, I hear I'm not ready to reprioritize my life to create a self-care routine. And this is something that I've had to come to terms with within myself, and I'd be lying if I said I had it perfect, because sometimes life gets ahead of us. But when we have a proper self-care routine, we're better able to navigate life's ups and downs. So what we've done for you at Soul and Wonder is if you go to www.soulandwonder.com/freebies, you can download a free copy of 4 Steps to a Self-Loving You. This is a self-care checklist that we've created ourselves that focus on the body, mind, and soul health. And it allows you to see which areas in your life need improvement for your self-care routine. And then following that checklist, it comes equipped with put together questions to help you dig deeper into the confines of your mind, and it also helps you keep track of this self-care routine and gives you tips and tricks on how to maintain it. And of course, that checklist is something that you can refer back to continuously improve on. So, once again, www.soulandwonder.com/freebies, FREEBIES. It's nice and short, to the point, and completely free. And of course, if you like our self-care checklist and the questions that it provides, then we would love to hear your thoughts on our Facebook page or Instagram, or just send us a nice little message.
And that will be it.
That's it. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week, same time.
Take care, folks.